And I'm going to stick with e4. Probably at some point I'll transition to d4, but yeah, sticking with normal opening principles. Knight f3, attacking the pawn. Knight c6 is by far most common move. And I'll play the Italian opening, bishop to c4. And we'll see what black wants to do. Knight f6, this is one of the most common moves, probably one of the most common openings in chess, not only at like a grandmaster level, but also at a beginner level. And in this position, I'm going to go for basically what's the beginning of the fried liver attack, which is knight to g5. Because the knight obstructs the queen from controlling g5, this is a very viable move. And I've noticed at the lower rating levels, a lot of players don't know how to deal with this attack against f7. Now, there are, I'd say, probably a couple playable moves for black, but knight b4 is not one of them. Knight b4, I don't think I've ever seen before. Now, it is a question, do I want to take the pawn with the bishop, which is the most forcing move, or do I want to take the pawn with a knight and fork the queen and the rook? I think it's more worth just grabbing material here, because after bishop takes f7, king e7, it looks good for white, but I just win a pawn in that line. In this one, I'm going to win the queen or the rook. So yeah, after this game, I'll show what black should have done after I played knight g5, because I think it's a very, very important opening for beginners to understand. Even if you don't enter such an opening too often, it's important to understand kind of the defensive mechanisms that black has. So now it's a matter of trying to just put the hammer down and show no mercy. The knight is undefended on g4, although this is kind of tricky because if I take the knight, then my queen is no longer defending c2, and black can take the pawn and then win my rook. There's also ideas like if queen takes g4, there's some d5 move. So, I mean, this move at first looks like a very careless blunder, but I think black is maybe trying to muddy the waters. I think I'll go ahead and take still, because it's very nice to get the queen into play, and there's ideas of eventually queen h5. But can't do that right away, of course. Let's move the king. Opponent pre-move knight takes rook. And now I have my queen, bishop, and knight all developed, basically. The knight might be able to play a role soon from the h8 square. But I think this is a point where I want to just pause to consider the candidate moves. Looking at probably the checks, first of all. Like there's bishop f7 check, there's queen h5 check. If I play queen h5, this looks good, hitting the king and the pawn. But then there's g6. And queen's attacked. I don't think I'm winning anything so easily there. Another idea is to just get more pieces into play. There's some idea to play knight c3 or even pawn d3. So I have a choice. Looking at bishop f7, king d8. And then it'd be really nice to get the bishop to g5. So I think I'll start with bishop f7. Provoke the king to a square where maybe it's going to be a bit more exploitable. Black has two legal moves here, so expecting king d8. Now d3. d5, okay, so discovered attack against my queen. And it would be a terrible mistake to play bishop g5 because black would take the queen with check and then win the bishop. That would be one way to potentially lose the game. So I think I just want to play a simple defensive move here, queen g3. Get the queen to safety and have the queen still support this g5 square for bishop g5. But this is kind of a messy position, like where you each won each other's rook in the corner. I am currently up a knight, but I'm soon to be up more material. Opponent missed idea. And yeah, this is a very common type of mistake at the beginner level, is to miss the opponent's simple tactics. In this case, it's a pin. And yeah, should be winning the queen. Once the queen is lost, then the king is going to be much more of a exploitable target. So we'll see how black tries to cope with this. I will say though that my opponent was like very tricky and resourceful in trying to muddy the waters after what was definitely an opening disaster. But yeah, now definitely no mercy. Let's take the pawn with check. The other two pawns were hanging as well, but it's nice to play in a forcing matter here. And there's no moves for the king. Black has to block with one of the bishops. And my goal here is to try and deliver checkmate as efficiently as possible. I'll play bishop e6. Bishop is pinned to the king along the d file. And now, yeah, let's cash in. Not quite mate. The king's going to run to f8. And black is actually threatening to play rook d8 and win my queen. So I really respect the fact my opponent's not giving up, trying to create last chances of a comeback. But now it's time to bring my knight back into play. Not only attacking the pawn, but preventing rook d8. And yeah, it's still taking a little bit more effort. Like not mating immediately, but I think the plan is to eventually take the pawn. Now, I don't want to take it right away to allow rook d8. Probably want to play something like king e2, maybe even king c1. Get the king to a safer spot. If I play king e2, the knight can come out. So I really want to show no mercy here. I'm going to play king c1. There's no bishop g5 check. I can take on g5. Meanwhile, the knight's stuck. The rook can't really do much. And yeah, let's take the bishop. And now mate is coming. Next move, regardless. There is one spite check, knight b3. But okay, finally got the job done there. Before I move on to the next game, I do want to provide a very quick lesson in this Italian two knights defense opening. Whether you play this as white or play against this as black, I think it's a useful position to know at least the next few moves. So after knight g5, really the move that should be played here is pawn d5. It's the only way to essentially save the f7 pawn. I should note there is what's called the Traxler variation, bishop c5, which maybe I'll play later on in the speed run at a higher rating level. This is an interesting one. Knight takes f7, and then bishop takes f2. Black actually gets a lot of counterplay here. But to keep things simple, yeah, d5 is the best move, blocking the bishop. And if my opponent played this, I would have taken. And here there's actually a very classic trap where if black takes the pawn, which looks very standard, knight supported by the queen, and the queen also hits the knight on g5, white has a really cool tactical combination here, starting with knight takes f7. And after king takes f7, there's queen f3, hitting the king and the knight. Knight f6 is not legal because the knight is pinned to the king. And the only way for black to save the king and the knight here is to play king e6. But this walks into knight c3. And yeah, white is definitely for choice in this position. So for any player that plays this as black and maybe runs into early trouble, the best move in this position is to play knight a5. And there's a lot of opening theory from here, but this is really the starting point. And after bishop to b5 check, there's c6. Many cases black does end up being down a pawn, but h6 comes and black actually gets some counterplay.